Thank you for joining us today. This is a topic that I've really been looking forward to having a conversation about for a long time because it's the melding of two data streams that are really meaningful to me. Here at Smarter Services, there are two services that we provide. Many of you on this webinar today are our current clients. So welcome home. We do have some guests, so we're glad that you're here as well. But many of you use Smarter Measure, which is our assessment that quantifies learner readiness through non-cognitive indicators. And many of you other ones use Smarter Proctoring, which is our multimodal proctoring platform. Some of you use both. And so what I'm talking about today is to what degree can this non-cognitive data that we collect through Smarter Measure be used in an expanded way? We use it, or a lot of schools use it to enrich conversations with students to help with retention, right? It identifies learners that may be at greater risk of dropping out with the goal of early supporting those students so that they don't drop out. What if there's an additional use of that data? Is there a relationship between those non-cognitive factors and then students who are going to feel a lot of pressure when things get tough and it's time for those midterms and they have to make decisions like, am I going to drop out or am I going to cheat on this test? So we're going to kind of explore that today, and I'm really curious to see what you have to think about it. A few housekeeping items as some others are joining us there. You can sit back and relax. There's not going to be a test, and you do not need to take notes because we're going to send you the slide deck. We'll send you the recording, so you'll get everything. And they're also there at the last bullet point in that email, there will be a link to a survey. And we'd love you to take a couple of minutes. Let us know what you thought about this topic and maybe suggest some other topics for future webinars. We do encourage interaction. So if you have a question or comment, just post it there in the chat feature in Zoom. My colleague Tara is monitoring that. If there's a teachable moment, she may interrupt me and speak that question and we can respond to it then, or we may hold them toward the end, or she may be able to reply in chat. But let us know your thoughts. For many of you who need to document your continuing education, if you could use a certificate of participation, let us know. Just send an email to certificates@SmarterServices, and we'll be glad to send that over to you. For those of you who are not as familiar with Smarter Services, I'll tell you a little bit about us. We've been around for a long time. 24 years is a long time for an ed tech company, right? And there are two primary solutions that we provide, Smarter Measure, which is our set non-cognitive readiness assessment, and then Smarter Proctoring. And so what I'm going to be exploring today is kind of melding of those two things, of using Smarter Measure data to create that culture of academic integrity before the proctoring event. So as we talk about this combining of data and combining of services, it's really important to understand, some things about these services. I know for some of you, this is going to be redundant information because some of you have been using, one or both of these services for a long time. But for the others, please allow me to review this. I'm not doing this in a way I'm not here to sell you anything today. Tomorrow, I'd be glad to sell you something, but today, this is a conversation, and you need to understand all of these types of data that is collected through Smarter Measure to understand what we're talking about in regards to how to use it. So with Smarter Measure, we start out looking at the student internally. We call those individual attributes. Those are things like control over procrastination, levels of motivation, willingness to ask for help, locus of control, things that kind of define the learner's learning personality. Speaking of their learning personality, we also have a learning styles instrument. It's based on the multiple intelligences model, so that's whether they're visual, verbal, social, solitary, those things. At learning styles is a good point to mention that while there are several scales here, schools do not have to administer every scale. You can turn some on or off. It's very easy to do. Learning styles is one scale that some schools do decide to opt out of. And I get it. There are varying opinions in the literature about the efficacy of learning styles and what that means for our instructional design and our student support. So if your school does not want to administer one of these skills, they can turn it off. So after we've looked at the student internally with their individual attributes and their learning styles, then we look at the student externally. We call that life factors. That's their availability of time. Do they have support from their employer and their family? Do they have an appropriate place to study, which is often a very important one? How's their general health and their finances? So it's kind of an environmental scan of what's going on in their life. So after we've looked at the student internally and externally, then we look at their skill set. We're looking at their technical knowledge, their technical skills, the degree to which technology's integrated into their life. A part of measuring technology is measuring their keyboarding rate and accuracy, as well as their on-screen reading rate and recall. So all of those skills combined is our non-cognitive attribute assessment, right? And the point of it is this. Schools typically screen for admission based on cognitive factors, meaning if you're smart enough, you get in. So if all students are smart enough to do the work, that begs the question, why would anyone ever drop out? But they do. So the reason students drop out often is not because they're not smart enough. You've already controlled for that. But it's because of these non-cognitive traits and attributes and skills, right? And we've got just decades of research in that. Some of that data has come from some of your institutions where we've identified multiple statistically significant correlations between these non-cognitive factors and then key student performance indicators like engagement, retention, satisfaction, and grades, right? So we know measuring these is really important. Now, for years, we measured these non-cognitive traits and attributes and skills. And then, especially when the pandemic came and a lot of states quit using standardized tests, a lot of our schools said, hey, we need to get a 30,000 foot view of their cognitive abilities. And so we did develop a math readiness indicator and a writing readiness indicator. These are not as diagnostic or prescriptive as, say, an AccuPlacer, but they're 30 item instruments. They pull from a pool of 90 items. So they give you a pretty good feel of a student's abilities with math and writing. And then you may have them do additional placement or some other types of test. So with all of that in mind, just think about all of those points of data that we're collecting about the student, right? Do they control procrastination? Are they willing to ask for help? Do they have enough time to study? All of these things going together paint a picture about that student. So keep all of those data points in mind. Now, let me do kind of a similar review for our proctoring platform, because where we're going with this is how using that smarter measure data may help a student decide on what proctoring modality is right for them, is one use of it, and there's some others that we'll address. But here's what we do through smarter proctoring. First of all, just like all other virtual proctoring providers, we do provide 3 modes of virtual proctoring. You've got automated proctoring, which is AI watching the student. You've got record and review, so the AI watches a student, and then one of our professional proctors reviews it after the fact, cleaning up any false positives so the faculty members don't have to deal with that. And then we have live virtual proctoring, and our live really is live. A real person watches them in real time. They watch the entire exam. So that's all virtual proctoring. Now, where we got our roots back in 2004, we started testproctors.com, and that was started out as a searchable database of places that students could go to take their test. That was back before virtual proctoring was ever invented. And we've been building that database ever since. And so we've got a very large, nationwide, global even, database of places students can go to take their test. Some of those are collegiate testing centers, some are professional testing centers. There's other proctoring professionals out there. So in a moment when we're talking about a student that's feeling the pressure and they're maybe being tempted to cheat, or they're neurodiverse, and taking a test by virtual proctoring raises a very heightened sense of anxiety, or maybe they're a student who is really concerned about their privacy and they don't believe us when we say, look, we're watching your camera when you're taking your test, but we're not looking at your camera any other time. Some students are very concerned about privacy and they don't want to believe that. So this is giving students an additional option. And there's even been one lawsuit where a student sued their school because the school was forcing them to do virtual proctoring. They thought it invaded their privacy and the school wasn't giving them an option. So all of these face-to-face modalities give students options. And in a moment, those options are going to be important. And then the last thing there in the middle of this chart is a virtual test center, which is really something that kind of came out of the pandemic because back when the quarantine happened, all of those people working at those physical testing centers had to go home. They could not proctor anymore. So we gave those people access to the same live virtual proctoring platform that our live proctors use so they could proctor exams while they were home. Well, when a lot of those people came back to the office, they kept on using it. And we have a lot of test centers now that use it because it expands their scale beyond, it doesn't limit them geographically just to people that are in driving distance of their testing center, but now they can proctor virtually for any of their students anywhere. And the old adage is if you want something done right, do it yourself. Well, there are some schools that like being able to have their own staff be the virtual proctors. So think about that. Think about all of these different modalities of proctoring that schools may choose, students may choose, combined with all of those things that we knew before about the student, right? So keep all that in mind. And let's talk about the fact that, as a company, we've been providing these two products in separate silos, right? They're different products. We sell them differently. There's a different way you log into each of them, right? We're very siloed in our approach. But it's not just us. Schools are the same way. When you look at a university or a community college, very often student retention and then academic integrity are handled by different departments, and there's very little interchange between those departments. But what if this same readiness data that can be used to project retention could also be used to project students who need support so that when the pressure comes, they don't decide to cheat or drop out? That's the big question I'm asking today. So to me, it all kind of takes the form of the fight versus flight. You remember from all of the biology courses that you took that when an organism is under stress, is under pressure, it has to make a choice. It can either fight that pressure or it can run from that pressure. So on this slide there under the cheating bullet, you'll see the word pressure is underlined because this whole conversation I'm having right now centers around this construct of pressure. Students feel pressure. We're going to be talking about some of those pressure points on the next few slides. But when a student feels a lot of pressure, like any organism, they may make a choice. They may make a choice to fight that pressure, and that could be in the form of cheating, or they could choose flight, which could be in the form of dropping out, right? So it's responding to pressure. So cheating can be seen as a calculated response to pressure. The pressure comes, maybe it's a high stakes exam, a midterm or a final. They've got limited time to study. So many of our students, not just, non-traditional age college students, but traditional age college students are often working part-time, many of them even full-time. And so finding that time to adequately study, it's difficult. It's a challenge. It's real pressure, or maybe fear of failure. So there's lots of types of pressure the student can be feeling. And as they're feeling that pressure, they may begin to rationalize and say, well, you know what? Everybody else is doing it. Maybe they're in a fraternity and they hear all their frat brothers talking about how they cheated. Or maybe they think, the system's just unfair and I'm going to get back at the system. And then they may perceive, a pretty easy opportunity to cheat, right? Maybe there were unclear boundaries set up in the course about, what's cheating and what's not, what's good use of AI and what's not. So there's unclear boundaries, and maybe the student perceives that the school is using no or a weak form of proctoring. So they're like, yeah, I've got an opportunity to cheat here and I think I'll get by with it. That's the perceived risk. They look at the risk versus reward equation and they're like, you know what? Yeah, it's worth it. So when the student feels this pressure and they go through this calculated response of rationalization and opportunity of perceived risk, that's where they're making that decision to cheat, right? So what does the literature say about what are some of the most common reasons why students cheat? Well, that's what's on this slide here. And there's our word again, pressure. Pressure to earn high grades. And if this area of cheating is not an area that you frequently work in, you may be naive to think, as many of us are when we first get into it, that it's the low performing students that cheat. It's not. So many of the persons that cheat are the high performing students. They feel a lot of pressure not to pass the course, not to pass the exam, but to make an A on the exam. That could be because their scholarship is dependent on their GPA, or maybe they're in a sorority and it requires a certain GPA they have to keep. Or maybe their parent is putting pressure on them saying, I'm paying all this money for you to go to school and you better not be flunking these classes. Or maybe they come from an international culture that if they, choose to go to the United States to study, that puts a lot of pressure on them from an ethnic reason. And so there's lots of ways that students feel pressure to make high grades, and that pressure, makes a lot of them decide to cheat. Poor time management, we mentioned that. A lot of students don't have time to study, and they don't use the time that they have, right? Or just weak study skills. If they've got time and they make time, college is not high school, and nobody's really guided them on this yet. And so they find that difficult. Perceived low risk, like we were saying earlier, they probably aren't going to get caught if they try it. And maybe that comes from peer influence. Other people have told them, hey, it's real easy to cheat at this school, or maybe they watch YouTube videos on how to cheat. And so all of it's kind of a performance orientation. So all of those things are kind of the main reasons why students decide to cheat. So what does the literature say about why students drop out? There's our word again, financial pressure. And this is not just non-traditional students who are having to work their way through school. A lot of traditional age college students too are having to pay for all or much of their tuition and fees, or maybe they're having to pay for their living expenses. Life is expensive for everybody right now. And when you've got another major thing going on in your life, like going to college, financial pressure is real. And so a lot of them feel that pressure and they drop out. Academic struggles, college is hard, right? Hopefully it is. We don't want it to be too easy. They're just not motivated to do it. They don't accept their personal responsibility. And there's mental health. Wow. I mean, I think we're all much more aware of this than we were even a decade or certainly 2 decades ago, that there's a mental health crisis among our students and they need so much service. And it does lead to a lot of students deciding to drop out. And then just poor institutional fit. This was not the right degree program or the school from them. So think about all those reasons of why students cheat and why they drop out. And then look at this slide. So there in the center are some of the shared risk factors that dropping out or cheating kind of share. Academic difficulty, poor time management, you see the list there. So this is that pressure that the student is feeling. They're feeling one or more, or maybe all of the things on this list. And as any organism does, they have to decide, am I going to fight it or am I going to flee from it? And fighting it could be in the form of cheating. The student stays enrolled but circumvents the standard, or dropping out. The student just leaves the standard entirely. So do you see how all this pressure, the same things that we're measuring for in Smarter Measure that lead to retention, could also lead to cheating? And well, I'm talking ahead of myself here. That's what's on this slide. So the non-cognitive traits and attributes and skills that we measure with Smarter Measure, the motivation, procrastination, time management, study skills, all these things that you see listed here. We've got decades of research that quantify that these traits are related to retention, right? We're confident of that. And the way your school is using that is you identify students that are at risk of dropping out and you provide more support to them. And we join you in that struggle. We provide you coaching guides that your success coaches or your advisors or your faculty, whomever is having that conversation with students, we put words in their mouth about what do you say when a student scores low on a certain construct. So that's the way most schools are using the Smarter Measure data, is to enrich conversations that they have with students, with the primary goal being, we don't want you to leave. What I'm communicating today is, for those of you that use Smarter Measure, there may be an enhanced use of that data. If you don't use Smarter Measure, we'd love for you to, but if you don't, your school's doing something. We've all got student services, right? You're all doing advising and student support in some way. We're all having conversations with students about student success. But how many times in those conversations is our goal not just please don't leave, but is our goal please don't cheat, right? How many times do we have conversations about the fact that a student like you, a student who doesn't manage their time well, a student who has low technical competency, a student who is prone to procrastinate, a student like you, there's coming a day when you're going to feel a lot of pressure, right? And that pressure may be at the time of the midterm, and you may be rationalizing because of what you hear from your peers, and you may be making a decision to cheat or not to cheat, right? Because of the pressure. So what I'm suggesting is, in these conversations with students, well before the test is going to happen, are we providing guidance and counseling using what we know about the student to help them make the right decision? So this slide may seem kind of odd coming from a company that provides a proctoring service, but there are limits to detection only models, right? If proctoring exams is the only thing you're doing to prevent cheating, I think you can do better. And here's why. Detection only happens after the academic integrity violation has happened, right? If you catch somebody cheating, they've already cheated, right? Wouldn't it be better to try to not just detect that, but to deter it? That's what we're here for, to talk about. Institutional responses are often punitive rather than developmental. You know, we give them a failing score on the test, or we kick them out of the program. Well, you know, that doesn't help them. Punitive responses can produce student resentment. And then finally, and I think the most important sentence on this slide, is that when we just focus on catching cheaters, that's not addressing these underlying pressures, the actual cause of why they made that decision to cheat, right? So how can we do better? Well, we need to move from a model that just focuses on surveillance to a model that focuses on support. So yes, we've got to have the accountability. There has to be the proctoring component. But let's add to that student self-understanding through a tool like Smarter Measure, having those rich conversations with students so that they know how a student like them that's prone to procrastinate, that there's pressure coming someday, right? Provide to that clear expectations about what do we consider cheating, what do we consider appropriate AI use, those things, and provide this intervention early. Don't wait until them to make that decision to cheat and then try to rectify the situation. So any conference that you go to, any presentation at any conference, I think it's required that we have a slide about AI, right? So this is my AI slide, actually this one and the next one. But I jokingly say that, but it's so pervasive because it's such an important topic right now, right? We've got to talk about the impact that AI is having on the student learning process and how that relates to these matters of non-cognitive readiness and academic integrity. So the other day, in something I read, I came across this statement, and I like it. Those of you that know me know I'm a big fan of alliteration, so it has that, but it also has more than that. It has a lot of meaning. Convenience changes cognition. And we know that's true because I can still tell you the phone number of the house I grew up in as a child. But right now, literally, I cannot tell you the phone number of my daughter who is a college senior. I love her dearly. But you know what? I don't know her phone number. Why? Because I know what she looks like. And I know I can touch her face on my phone and it will call her or it will text her, right? Or it will send her an email. So convenience changes cognition. Yeah, that's simple. We get that for something like remembering phone numbers. But what are the ramifications of that for the teaching and learning process if it's so convenient to use AI? Are students really learning? Well, that's what I was thinking about here. And what I'm about to share with you, this is Mac Adkins's soapbox, right? You're welcome to agree or disagree with what I have to say. In fact, I'd love to hear any thoughts about this in chat, and we'll talk about it in just a moment at the end. But this is my personal view of how we can appropriately use AI. And so my view is we need to identify appropriate uses of AI in our courses so that students can learn that skill. I'm an employer. We've got, probably about 100 employees in this company. And so if we're going to hire somebody, guess what we're looking for now? We're looking for experience using AI because it's something employers need and they want students that have had that experience. So if a student comes out of our program and they don't know, Claude from ChatGPT, right? That's not good. So we've got to identify and, more importantly, have meaningful conversations with our student about the types of things that they need to know and be able to do, and then provide clear expectations about how we'll be assessing that in a way that does or does not involve the use of AI. So here's what I'm thinking. I think there's three kinds of knowledge that we've got to put in the heads of our students, right? And we've got to be able to assess that knowledge. First of all is what I call quick knowledge. Now, take a nurse, for example. There are things that nurses need to know immediately off the top of their head. If they see a patient exhibiting some symptom, or if they see a medicine about to be given that's got some, interaction with some other medicine, they need to know those things and they need to know it now, right? There's no time to go look it up. That's quick knowledge that they need to know immediately. Well, these types of facts, I think, are very well assessed through objective question types like multiple choice and fill in the blank. And the beauty of that is that you can automate this assessment. You can build it, into your course as just checks for understanding even before there are graded tests. And then on graded tests, you can have these types of questions too. But you can ask these questions very frequently and very often. So these are low stakes kind of questions, but you're asking them often. And a good way to kind of control the environment there might be automated proctoring. Now, the next level is deep knowledge. These are constructs that are your graduates, whatever discipline you're teaching them, these are things they need to understand to the degree that they can problem solve with it. So think about maybe an engineer. I'm not an engineer. I don't even know what a good example would be here, but suppose an engineer they're about to put a really big, heavy air conditioning unit on the top of a building. And that engineer is helping determine where to position the crane and how big of a crane. I don't know what engineers do. But there are some principles of physics that engineer needs to understand at a deep conceptual level, right? And so that's the deep knowledge, the problem solving knowledge that we need to be giving to our students. How do we assess that? Well, I love like discussion questions, situational judgment tests, where we're giving a complex scenario to the student and they've got to come back with a response on that. Live proctoring is a great way to do that because these are very high end, very complex, high stakes questions that the student needs to demonstrate their knowledge. Now, the third one is not quick knowledge or deep knowledge. It's really how well the student can represent themselves as a professional, right? We want our graduates to look like graduates when they go to employers, right? So how do we assess that in a controlled environment? Well, I'll go back to a question type that I've liked for years, right? And that's the oral exam. And the good news about an oral exam is they can be used very easily in virtual proctoring. But this is a question type that I rarely see schools do, and that kind of behooves me. But imagine you've got a test, and maybe the faculty member makes a video of them asking the question beforehand, or maybe it's just a question that the student sees, but the student is immediately required to speak back into the camera, just like I'm doing right now. And if they're doing virtual proctoring, guess what? They're already there. There's already a camera. There's already a microphone. It's perfect for oral exams. And what that does is it not only allows the student to demonstrate the facts and the knowledge, but it allows them to represent themselves as a professional, right? So that's kind of my three categories of knowledge. And so what we need to be doing as educators is having conversations with our students saying, okay, here's a course, it's a nursing course, whatever. There are some facts you need to know. And we're going to be measuring those facts throughout the course with a little check for understanding questions that aren't graded. And then we're going to have, weekly unit quizzes, and those are going to be proctored through automated proctoring. But there's some deeper things you need to know, problem solving level questions. Midterm and the finals really going to focus on that. Those may be proctored, with live proctoring. And then there's also professionalism that you need to demonstrate at the end of this course. There's going to be a major topic question that I'm going to expose you to, and you're going to need to respond to me verbally and explain to the students the reason we're doing this assessment strategy is to allow them to appropriately use AI during the course. So let's say they're a nursing student and they're going to do a presentation in the class. My opinion is it's fine for them to use AI to come up with the PowerPoint slides. Guess what? I used it to create this one. Now I edited it heavily after it, and here I am. I'm not AI. I'm a human presenting it, but I used AI to create it, and I think that's okay. I think it's okay for students in your course to create some things. Could be presentations, could be papers, whatever it is, it's okay as long as they know there's also going to be a type of assessment where the environment is controlled, meaning that it's proctored for them to demonstrate their quick, their deep knowledge, and their professionalism. So I'll get off my soapbox and maybe we'll come back to that later. But back to what we're talking about is how readiness, support, and accountability all work together. Yeah, measuring readiness at the beginning. A lot of you use Smarter Measure, and that's awesome. If you don't use Smarter Measure, we'd love for you to, but learn about your students and help your students learn about themselves in some way. And then don't let that data just sit on a shelf. Use that data in your academic coaching. Have enriched conversations with your students about their levels of readiness and their traits and their attributes, and how someday there's coming some pressure and they may feel like they need to drop out or they may feel like they need to cheat, but you're going to provide enough tutoring and skill building to get them ready for that moment of pressure and let them know that there is a day coming when there's going to be accountability, right? There's going to be proctored exams to allow them to demonstrate what they know. So that's this concept of don't just detect, deter. So what are the benefits of this preventive, proactive model? For schools, you're going to have fewer integrity violations. That sounds pretty good, right? That's going to build a stronger culture of integrity, improve retention because students aren't, being kicked out, more defensible assessment practices. All of those are great goals for our programs. And how about for the students? Well, they're going to have increased self-awareness. They're going to understand more about themselves. They'll have reduced test anxiety because they've been, knowing in advance that it's coming. They'll have clearer expectations because of those conversations that you're having with the student. And all this support's going to arrive before the cheating occurs, not after the cheating happens. So what all this does is it shifts the institutional message from we're watching you to one of more of we want you to succeed honestly and we're here to help. So moving forward, what does this mean to you at an application level? Now, for those of you that already use Smarter Measure, go back with your group of people that look at that data and that have the conversations with the students and say, how can we maybe enhance those conversations to not just talk about, we don't want you to drop out, but to talk about this pressure that's coming, right? And how can a student like them be prepared to stand up under that pressure, not cheat on their exam, and to demonstrate what they know and what they can do in a controlled environment, right? That's a very good use of the data. If you don't use Smarter Measure, there's something that you're using. There's some way that you're having conversations with your students. Think about having conversations with the students about the pressure to ward off this cheating. Now, one of the reasons I want to do this webinar is to kind of talk about a potential research project. I've talked to a couple of schools already that use both Smarter Measure and Smarter Proctoring, and that would be ideal. But, for the past 2 decades, what we've done is we've quantified and we statistically analyzed all of these non-cognitive data points, and we know they're connected to retention, but we've not quantified it yet. We've not measured it yet. We suspect that there is a relationship between these student traits like control over procrastination and then, incidences and frequencies of incidents of academic cheating, but we don't know that. We haven't quantified it. But boy, I would love to do that. So maybe if you or you know someone that's going to be doing dissertation research, well, I mean, this would be an awesome dissertation topic, right? It's challenging research because you've got human subjects review. And I think at most schools, they would come to a decision that it needs to be ad hoc research, meaning that you're going to have to go through a period of time where you got data from students as they enrolled, and then they went 4 or 5, 6 years, whatever the time period is, and then they've graduated. And then you're looking at their frequencies of academic integrity violations to look at that relationship, right? So you're doing it post hoc so that there's no way that this analysis can impact the student's, ability to succeed. What I'm not saying is that we use non-cognitive data to target students, to make some students be proctored and others not be proctored. I don't think that's an ethical, use of this. But I think what is ethical and what's appropriate is to use what we know about students to increase their level of awareness. So when they feel that fight or flight tension, they respond appropriately. So that's the end of what I had to share in this one. I want to tell you about another webinar that's coming up on September the 16th. You'll be getting an email with a registration link, or if not, when you get this slide deck, I put a link there on the bottom of this slide. But the title of that webinar is Locking Down Academic Integrity Before the First Exam. So, even in what I've said today, proctoring has got to be there. You've got to have that accountability. And for those of you that use Smarter Proctoring, what this webinar is going to be doing is giving you a full overview of what's all the functionality, and there's a lot of it, of ways that you can lock down not only the browser, but you can lock down the whole computer, and you can also lock down the whole room. The way that works is, everybody's got lockdown browsers, and we call that secure session extension. But we've got a thing called the secure session app, which controls the entire computer, right? It's not just locking down the browser, it's locking down everything. And then we also have a second camera ability, which can be positioned beside or behind the student so that you're seeing the whole room. So we're going to be talking about that, of how you can really create an environment that's appropriate for testing. So I'm going to pause right there. We've got about 20 minutes. We can spend as much of that or as little of that as you would like. Let me go over to the chat and see. Tara, are there any questions or comments that we can surface at this point?
Not at this time, but please do feel free to share any feedback that you have or questions that you have for Mac.
And I just realized that I did not put my email address on this last slide, but it's really easy. It's just Mac, M-A-C, at SmarterServices.com. If you've got thoughts about this topic, or if you or you know someone that would like to do some research on this area, I think it's something we need to quantify. It's something we need to measure. What is the relationship between non-cognitive attributes and decisions to commit academic integrity violations? If we understand that about students and we know that relationship is true, that's just going to further empower us to support the right students early on.